So, last time we talked about the for loop and have seen that for loop allows us to run some code for a specific amount of times based on a condition if it's true or false when we do a comparison to the variable that we tested, and then after each block of iteration we increment the value or decrement or change it using the afterthought expression. Today we're going to talk about the while loop, which is actually a generic loop. It is very similar to an if condition in terms of structure, but different that in if statement you run a if statement and check and it takes a boolean, and if the boolean is true then we execute the code, and if it's false then we bypass the code. In the while loop it's very similar, but here if the boolean is true then we execute that code just as the same as the if statement, but here we keep on repeating that code, that block of code, until the boolean turns to false. So let's head into code and see what the while loop is all about. So I'll get into Plunker here, and as you see I can set a variable first, and I'm going to call it my number, and I'm going to set it to 0, and then we're going to create a while loop using the keyword while, and then having a parentheses just like the if statement, and then a curly brackets, and here it takes a boolean or something that resolves into a boolean. So I'm going to set while my number is smaller than 5, then we're going to execute this code. Here I'm going to create a console log. I'm going to say my number, print it on the console. So I console log this, but if I run this now, this is going to be trouble, because you see my number is equal to 0, and we're testing if 0 is smaller than 5, which is correct, but we're never changing my number, which will basically let this loop run forever in an infinite loop, breaking this Plunker website and breaking my application. So how to fix that? So if you remember from the for loop, what we had is an afterthought, which is an expression being the expression being executed after the block of code is finished. So since while loop is a generic loop, and we don't have like the for loop, which is very much the for loop specifically made to run the code for a specific amount of times, we have the afterthought, but parameter that we can use here we don't have that, so we can use that here inside of the while loop itself. So my number plus plus. So here if I execute this right now, it's taking a little bit of time to load. Okay, it ran. So it's a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and probably you're gonna ask me now, this is so familiar, it's the same logic that we had with the for loop. That's correct, because while loop is a generic loop and you can create any type of logic with the while loop. So for example, we mimicked right now what the for loop was doing, but so there's stuff that the for loop can't do, and or it can probably do, but if you edit the for loop in a way that is semantically not correct, but using the while loop here, we're gonna do stuff that the for loop should not be doing, and which is checking for a boolean. And so let me create here a boolean. I'm gonna call it my boolean, and I'm gonna set it to true. Okay, so we have this as true, and now like an if statement we could use a boolean right away, which means here this while loop will execute if this is true, and if I run this right now it will run forever, since basically my boolean is true and we never even changed it. So what the while loop can do is, whenever we're running this while loop, we can do some complex operation that after some time, and we don't know how many times, we don't know, but some complex operation is going to happen that will change this boolean, my boolean, to false after some time. So here, for demonstration purposes, we can use a simple example, which is checking if my number is bigger than or equal to 10, we are going to change my boolean to false. And if we do that now and rerun this code, you are going to see we have 0 until 10, which means that we ran that code 11 times here, since we have the 0, and whenever we reached my number plus plus in the last time, and my number changed to 11, and we went up there, which whenever we reach my number, whenever I reach my number is equal to 10, we executed, it was 9, and then we incremented to 10, and then we went up there. My boolean is still true, but now my number is 10, so it's equal to 10. Since we're testing if my number is bigger than or equal to 10, we turn my boolean to false. We console log it last time and change it to 10, and then my number plus plus will be executed, making our number be 11. And then we're gonna all go up there, but that does not matter turning to 11 because my boolean now is false, so we can escape this loop and break out of it because my boolean now is false. So that's the while loop. Very powerful because it's generic. You can create any kind of condition to repeat the loop. It does not have to be a specific number of times, just like the for loop. But here, the while loop, you can execute very complex operations that does not rely on how many times, but maybe relying on changing the boolean from true to false, and then getting out of the loop. So one last kind of loop here. It's that we're going to talk about today. There are other types of special loops that we're going to talk about whenever we reach into objects and arrays. But here, there is a specific type and a special type of a while loop. It's called a do while loop. If you look into this code, let's say I remove all of that and just keep the console log. And now we only have my boolean, so I'll just console log my boolean and change this to false. If I run this right now, you're gonna see that we only don't get anything because this is false. And now while checking if it's if it's true, then no, it's not true. Then we're not gonna run that code block. But imagine if you have some kind of scenario that you have some code you want to repeat if a condition is true, but you want to repeat it at least once, even if the condition is false. So just like we have here, this is false. So let's say that I want to run this at least one time, and then if it's false, then we don't want to run it again. And if it's true, then we want to keep on repeating it until it becomes false. So there's a special type of loop, which is called the do while loop, which you change this to a do and get this parentheses, and now we have this do, right? And then curly brackets right away, and then you type your block of code here, and then you use the while after the curly brackets, and then you have what you have here is inside of the parentheses the boolean. So what that does here is, okay, we're checking if that's true or false, but we are gonna run this at least one time before we check. So if we see here, okay, it runs this is false. That means that it ran it once and then checked if my boolean is actually true or false, which is false here, then we get out of the loop. And if that is true, then we're gonna keep on repeating it until it reaches false. So